From a studio high above the clouds of the Okanagan Valley, this is the Cannabis Podcast. Exploring the world of Canadian cannabis culture, one toke at a time. Now, here's your host and bud tender, Gary Johnston.
And this would be the opportunity for me to welcome you back to the Cannabis Podcast. Thanks for coming back. I appreciate it every single time you come back. Maybe this is your very first time. If it is, well, let me give you an exceptionally warm welcome. Ahead, we have 30 or 40 minutes of information about a plant I'm absolutely passionate about, and that is the cannabis plant. You obviously have some interest as well, or you probably wouldn't be here. Before we get too much further, let me remind you this program is intended only for those 19 or older in your jurisdiction, and is intended primarily for entertainment and perhaps educational purposes. You should always consume your cannabis responsibly. In episode 160 of the Cannabis Podcast, we're going to talk about an event that happened in Kelowna this last week, the Growing Opportunity, where a bunch of producers and retailers and various sundry people like myself gathered. It was a great event. Manitobans are apparently still waiting to be able to grow their 4 cannabis plants. Last week I thought they were able to, but no, they're not. The federal minister has been listening to the craft farmers of BC and made some changes in relation to that. And in fact, we'll talk about what those regulation changes are. We've often talked about the saturation of cannabis stores, and on Salt Spring Island, it's really demonstrated by the fact they're trying to open a second store. Another story on seniors making more visits to emergency rooms because of edibles, and some clarification on that. And do you know why cannabis smells like skunk? Well, let me introduce you to thiols. And on Cultivar Corner, speaking of cannabis, we are going back to the folks at Sweetgrass in Nelson. And it is their 91 Octane. It sounds good, and it was good. All of that and more on episode 160 of the Cannabis Podcast. And as always, I want to thank you for being a listener of the Cannabis Podcast. I truly appreciate the fact that you're here. I also want to thank my supporters from buymeacoffee.com/cannabispodcast. I want to thank Jordana, Kevin, and Jordan. And if you feel so inclined, you can also go there and buy me a doobie if you like what you hear. And 1% of the income that comes through that channel does go to climate change research. And of course, I also want to thank my patrons at Patreon. Thanks to Tony, Roger, Rob, Gage, Lloyd, and Mitchell. I thank each and every one of you for your support. Thanks so much. You'll find the links to those at the top right on the show page for the Cannabis Podcast. And now, let's get to our first story. And a story from stratcan.com, this one written by David Brown. Health Canada released numerous proposed regulatory changes to the federal cannabis rules and regulations on June 7th as part of a 30-day consultation process ending on July 8, 2024. The proposed changes include regulatory amendments that are aligned with the findings and recommendations from the federal government's expert panel's final report on the legislative review of the Cannabis Act. The proposed changes aim to encourage more diversity and competition in the legal cannabis market by reducing the regulatory and administrative burdens faced by license holders. The health agency that oversees cannabis published a notice of intent in the Canada Gazette Part 1 and is seeking feedback on potential amendments to the cannabis regulations. Those proposed changes include increasing the threshold for micros from 200 to 800 meters squared, and the microprocessing license possession threshold from 600 kilograms to 2,400 kilograms of dried cannabis or its equivalent. Increasing nurseries' canopy size for seed production increasing from 50 square meters to 200 square meters, allowing them to harvest up to 20 kilograms of flowering cannabis for seed production. Removing the requirement for actual THC and CBD on product labels, only total THC and CBD. Increasing the number of permitted alternate quality assurance persons, or QAPs, to 1 or more from the current allowance of up to 2. Licensed processors would no longer be required to provide printed copies of the consumer information document with every cannabis product package sent. Formalizing COVID-19 era flexibilities, adding grounds for suspension of any licenses held by the same license holder should they have unpaid fees or have failed to submit a required statement of cannabis revenue for a license as required under the cannabis fees order. Amending the industrial hemp regulations to remove the maximum THC concentration of 10 parts per million for industrial hemp grain derivatives, the testing requirement, labeling for wholesale, and import and export requirements. Allowing for differentiation in color between the lid or cap of a container and the container itself. Permitting cutout windows on packaging for dried or fresh cannabis products and cannabis seeds, while upholding the exclusion of cutout windows for all other classes of cannabis. A bit of a sidebar. And that means we can have a window into our weed. It's about time. End of sidebar. Allowing dried or fresh cannabis products, in addition to cannabis plants and cannabis seeds, to be packaged in transparent containers, while maintaining existing rules prescribing opaque or translucent packaging of all other classes of cannabis. Removing the cumulative 10 milligram THC limit for an outermost container of edible cannabis product to allow greater flexibility in packing multiple immediate containers, as long as the immediate containers do not have more than 10 milligrams of THC each. And a bit of a sidebar again, what that means, I think, is what I've been hearing about, is people are going to be coming out with packages of 100 milligrams of THC, and each individual piece will still only be 10 milligrams, so we'll see if that changed. And now again, these changes, we're probably not going to see them for actual months. And removing the requirement to file an NNCP to Health Canada for dried or fresh Canada products. And I'm also going to have a link back at Cannabis Podcast because they want some feedback on these, and we have until July 8th. So go to the show page, pick up the link to where you can fill out your information and give them some feedback, and do that by July 8th. They are finally making some changes we have been asking for. And let's hope these come to play and we start to see the effect of those changes.
From the cannabis-infused studio in the clouds, this is the Cannabis Podcast.
And this story from castanet.net. A few hundred cannabis enthusiasts, growers, and retailers gathered at El Dorado Monteo Resort in Kelowna on Monday to learn about all things pot. The one-day event was hosted by StratCan, a cannabis news and events platform, which you, of course, are very familiar with because we use a lot of stories from StratCan. StratCan owner David Brown, who I had the opportunity to finally meet, says the goal of the event is to engage the community in discussion and brainstorming on industry issues from a variety of perspectives. Brown says since recreational pot was legalized in 2018, the industry has faced a number of ups and downs. This is a highly controlled substance, so for retailers, there are a lot of provincial rules in place that they can find challenging. For producers, there are a lot of provincial as well as federal regulations, red tape, regulatory fees, and the federal excise tax that can take the profits out of the industry and make it challenging for people to make a living, he said. When you become a licensed cannabis producer, you must pay a federal excise duty when the cannabis products you package are delivered to a purchaser. The tax for cannabis producers amounts to the higher of $1 per gram or a 10% per gram fee for dried and fresh cannabis, plants, and seeds. Brown says roughly 75% of cannabis purchases are coming from the legal market. That's going to depend region to region, and obviously the Okanagan is well known for a very robust industry outside of the regulations. But overall, I think the industry is growing, and you're seeing a lot of folks coming over from a less regulated space into the legal industry. Back in February 2024, the provincial government gave the green light to promote cannabis-friendly spaces and consumption of cannabis on public patios. We have moved beyond a space of hype and overexcitement that we saw in the very early days of legalization. You now have businesses focusing on the fundamentals of what it is going to operate in the space, Brown added. And that's a story from castanet.net, and let me add a bit more to that because I was at the Growing Opportunities in Kelowna last Monday. It was a great opportunity to get together with a bunch of people. I want to say hi to a few people that I met. I, of course, spent some time with Tyler Tetro and his son Isaac. They are from Rocky Mountain Cannabis. Also, Jesse Seegers from Legacy Mountain and Smokin' Joe's. Spent some time with them at the table. I finally got an opportunity to meet Brady Sparrow and Matt Sparrow. We've been kind of circling around each other for a long time, and nice to get to meet them. Also, nice to meet Alana Davis. Alana Davis from Dabble Cannabis. She is a fan of the podcast, a frequent listener. Thanks so much, Alana. I appreciate the fact that you listen and that you came up and told me about it. And you have some really wonderful product. My goal is eventually to get to Vancouver Island and take a look at what's happening at Dabble Cannabis, but also hoping that we're going to get Alana onto the show and have a chat with her. So we did meet her. Pleasure to do that. Also, nice to meet Janine Davis again. Janine Davis from the folks at JVCC, Joint Venture Cannabis. We also know them as BC Black, and now we know them as Dealer, Dealr. That's their new brand, and they are really promoting that strongly. Also sitting at my table was Shane Donald from Grodan, and that was, I think, the people at the table. I saw Roger Hulstein there. A Pure Sun Farms rep, Jeff and Sherry Aubin were there. Jeff was one of the speakers on one of the panels. had a lot of fun. It was a great opportunity. Ty from Woody Nelson, he was there. Jamie Miller Haywood from Western Extraction. Just met all these people. It was a fun day. I quite enjoyed it. Now, what's also fun about these events, and I don't know whether this is just at the Manteo Resort or whether this is happening at other places they're holding these, but the patio, just a lovely place to go and smoke a joint a whole bunch of times. And not only smoking a joint, we had some dabs going over in the patio area. It was a blast. There is still nothing better in this Canadian world of legalized cannabis to be at a facility where an event is going on, walk out the door onto the patio, pull out a joint, and suddenly there's 3-4 people around waiting to share that joint with you. It was lovely. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a great time. I'm hoping that I have made enough contacts that over the next few weeks you're going to hear some interviews pop up from some of the people that we talked to there. Really enjoyed it. Thanks to David Brown and Heather, the folks at StratCan who organized it all. It was a great event, and I can't wait till the next one. And another story from StratCan written by David Brown, and this one related to, we've had a lot of talk about this in terms of the saturation of cannabis stores and how saturated can they be and still survive. Well, here's a different perspective for you. A BC court has ruled that a community's rejection of a retail cannabis license was not unreasonable following an appeal by the retail applicant. The appeal was before the Supreme Court of BC in relation to a 2022 application for a cannabis store to operate with a provincial license in the village of Ganges on Salt Spring Island. In a town hall meeting on June 22, 2023, the applicant, Canna Northwest Enterprises Incorporated, had their application denied by the Salt Spring Island Local Trust Committee, based on its location's proximity to schools, a public library, and a public park. The applicant appealed the decision, seeking a judicial review with the court, arguing the decision was unreasonable and was based on protecting another previously approved cannabis store. Several attendees at the town hall meeting expressed concern with both the location of the proposed store and concern that the small community did not need more than one cannabis store. Another store, the Harvest Moon, had been approved by the LTC in April of 2020 and is located about 1 kilometer from the new applicant. Employees of the Harvest Moon spoke out against the new application in the town hall alongside other community members. In 2021, Salt Spring Island's population was listed at about 12,000. The Licensed Retail Cannabis Council of BC also provided a submission to the LTC, which, while not taking a specific position on the application, referred to factors such as the inability of the regulated retailers to differentiate themselves through pricing or marketing, the problem of excess concentration of retail operations in given locations, and exceptionally low profit margins. The location of the proposed store was previously home to an unlicensed cannabis store. In 2019, Leaf Compassion Cannabis applied for a license. At the time, there was no opposition to the location by the community, with the local Advisory Planning Commission recommending that the LTC support the application. However, once the supported application was forwarded to the provincial government for approval, the BC Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch did not approve the license. Leaf Compassion's website now redirects to an unregulated online cannabis store called Barely Legal. Arguing for the license, the applicant's principal, Mr. Chouinard, submitted a petition to the LTC in support of the application with 90 signatures. Chouinard argued that he was not made aware of concerns regarding location prior to the town hall meeting, was not given notice that the application would be discussed during the town hall, and was not given a meaningful opportunity during the meeting to address the issue of location. The ruling justice in the appeal countered these points, noting that concerns with the location had been communicated to the applicant and that he had the opportunity to attend any town halls where his application was discussed. So as you see, the abundance of cannabis stores in any particular location can still cause a fuss, especially when you're on Salt Spring Island and they're talking about their second store.
THC, CBD, terpene profiles, what's in me? Oh, please explain to me. Cultivar Corner, Cultivar Corner, oh yeah. Cultivar Corner, please explain this stuff to me.
And a special treat on Cultivar Corner today. We're going back to the Kootenays, some people that we have talked about before. It's the Sweetgrass method we're going to be talking about. The Kootenay region has long been a favored locale for aficionados of fine BC bud. In a scene going back decades, the culture out here has gathered a vast reservoir of knowledge covering almost every imaginable technique for producing our area's #1 crop. We've developed the Sweetgrass method of cultivation, hand in hand with many people over the years, and we owe our gratitude to them. In that time, we've continued to do our own research and have come up with a system of growing that we feel sets a new benchmark for what exceptional craft cannabis can be. Our cannabis is organically grown and is certified by the Fraser Valley Organic Producers Association, that FVOPA you see on some packages. This certifying body is compliant with the Canadian organic standards in accordance with the BC Certified Organic Program. We follow a stringent list of requirements to ensure that everything we use, from soil components and compost to amendments and supplements, is 100% in line with their guidelines. We've worked hard to meet and even exceed these requirements because we believe that growing organically is healthier for the consumer, our employees, and the planet as a whole. We've invested in this system because it reflects our inherent values as humans and as an organization. Living soil can generally be thought of as a living biological system, not unlike what you would naturally find outside in the garden. It's alive and involves all sorts of cooperative relationships between its respective members, small and large, and they of course grow in living soil. And the Sweetgrass method incorporates a hands-on approach. Maybe it's a bit of the old school shining through, but we know that we're having regular contact with our plants leads to a finer product, and in turn, to a more refined user experience. And the future is here. All of our crops are grown indoors under a canopy of energy-efficient LED horticultural lights. LED, or light-emitting diodes, has been advancing rapidly over the past 10 years and is clearly the way forward for a microcultivation facility. Steady and convincing results have shown us that this is the greener way to produce year-round indoor cannabis. Well, there's the background on Sweetgrass. We've had them on the show before, and we've talked about them before, and what I want to tell you is they won. The Grow Up Conference, which was recently held in Toronto, the 2024 version of that Grow Up Conference, and the Micro Producer of the Year coming out of that conference was Sweetgrass Cannabis. And we are doing one of their rare cultivars on Cultivar Corner today, and this is their 91 Octane Indica Dominant. Oh, now we're cooking with gas. 91 Octane is a super frosty Indica Dominant cultivar resulting from a cross between award-winning Biscotti and Scotty Too Hotty. 80% indica, 20% sativa. Its lineage includes Rainbow Chip, a strain that provides a gassy flavor, while Biscotti's parental traits from Gelato and OG Kush give you that punch that hits hard in the chest. Aromas of fuel, dark roast, coffee, and leather translate to a gassy, cushy smoke. Oh, I'm loving the smell coming out of that, and when they say gassy, they really mean a gassy aroma coming out of that. And because these are so frosty covered, I got to pull out my jeweler's loop first thing. And let's take a look at one of these. So really nice. I'm full on my 7 grams. Was full on 7 grams, which I always appreciate. And as I look at it through my jeweler's loop, oh my goodness, the frosty trichomes are truly abundant. So we got a lot of dark green pistils. We got a lot of dark green. I got some red pistils in here. Oh, and there's some purple activity in there too. All kinds of different colors in this bud. Oh, actually lots of little purple notes in there. Oh, and just delightful gassy aroma. And we've got some stickiness. And I'm going to pull out enough here to get myself a joint and get me ready to rock in my Air Max. We've always enjoyed everything we have gotten from Sweetgrass Cannabis, and really happy that they were in the running and picked up the Micro Cultivator of the Year at the Grow Up Conference in Toronto recently. At the end of May is when that one was happening. And we've had a chance to roll the joint and get the Air Max all ready. And let me give you a little bit more detail on Sweetgrass. So the 91 Octane is a special, it's a limited cultivar, a limited edition cultivar, 80% indica, 20% sativa. And I always love it when they put those splits in there. I'm not sure how they figure out that 80-20%. So I'm going to be 80% indica and 20% sativa. Let's tell you what my details are. My THC is sitting at 24.2%, and my terps are sitting at 2.8%. So this is 91 Octane in Indica Dominant from the folks at Sweetgrass Cannabis, some organic cannabis out of the Kootenays, and let's have a taste. My flavors are gas and skunk And I have to be honest and say, I have not really smelled any skunk in cannabis for about 20 years. My buddy Gord used to grow some really skunky weed, so skunky that you couldn't get within 2 blocks of that before you'd think there was a herd of skunk around. I'm not smelling any skunk, but that's no fault. Oh, but the gassiness, holy. You stick your nose into this, and it's like you're sticking your nose in a jar of fuel. Really, really gassy. So nice smooth intake. Bit of those gassy tones on my exhale. My aromas, fuel, roast coffee, and leather. Can't say I'm picking up a lot of leather. Maybe a bit of roast coffee perhaps on my exhale. Let's try for a real taste. And let's try the Air Max, the Ariser Air Max. And this is 91 Octane from Sweetgrass Cannabis in the Kootenays. Oh, wow. Gas, gas, gas. Oh, that is a nice taste. That is really nice. Let's tell you what the terpenes are. Oh, and there's my first buzz, too. I love it when that feels like that. I have 6% of delta-limonene, 5% caryophyllene, 3% humulene, 3% cyanidins. I've got to try to figure out how to pronounce that one sometime. 3% pinene and 1% ocimene. So a lot of terpenes in there. My total terp sitting at 2.8. And yeah, I am already feeling some of the effects of this. As I cross between the joints and the Air Max, my euphoria is already there, folks. Now, am I surprised? No, because Sweetgrass grows some really nice cannabis. And this is their 91 Octane Indica Dominant, 80% Indica, 20% Sativa. Oh, my. And that is just going right into my endocannabinoid system. My CB1 receptors picking up all that THC, la, 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 la. And again, when I go back to the Air Max, and I can taste the various tastes, the gas, the skunk, definitely some of those fuel tastes, a little bit of the roast coffee when I'm going through my Air Max. I'm getting a touch of that, but I'm definitely getting some impactful impact. Yeah, you know, if you've been a listener of this podcast for any length of time, you know, when I'm in the middle of a cultivar corner and I just start to ramble, it means that I'm getting pretty high. And I have to say, I think I'm in that rambling stage. Loving the joint, loving it out of the Air Max, loving the taste of that, lots of gassy notes. I'm not going to say I'm picking up much of the skunk, but I think that's me more than anybody else. This is 91 Octane from the folks at Sweetgrass Cannabis. They won the Micro Producer of the Year at the recent Grow Up Conference in Toronto. They're doing some good work in the Kootenays. It's all organic, it's all good, and it's getting me pretty buzzed. This is a 91 Octane day. And as I want to do, after that has rolled around in my endocannabinoid system a little bit more, yeah, this is really nice. Getting nice and deep. So that 80% indica it's in my head, a little bit in my body, so I got a little bit of a body stone going on. But that 20% of sativa is kind of giving me that spark to get some things done while I'm sitting on the couch enjoying my body relaxation. It definitely has gotten deeper. I'm really enjoying this. Once again, Sweetgrass has grown some pretty fine cannabis.
Sharing stories about good weed while trying good weed. This is the Cannabis Podcast.
And this is a story I had forwarded to me by my sister-in-law, Joan Stewart. Wanted me to not only read the story, but to also offer perhaps some advice how people can avoid having a similar story written about them. This is from CBC. More seniors landing in emergency departments for cannabis poisoning after legalization study finds. And I'm going to put a bit of a sidebar in here. There is some qualification to that statement. End of sidebar. At 80, Bob McBride uses cannabis both recreational and to manage what he calls age-related pain. I smoke it occasionally, and I use gummies, McBride, who's from the Ottawa Valley in southeastern Ontario, told The Current. I do either or both, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. Having used cannabis for most of his life, McBride says he knows his limit and how to take cannabis safely. It's enjoyable. It's relaxing. It stimulates me in conversation. It enhances a lot of the things that I do through the day, he said. I think of it as a user-friendly drug that I have learned how to use responsibly. Seniors like McBride are among the fastest-growing age group in Canada for using cannabis. A Statistics Canada report found that more than 400,000 seniors reported using cannabis in the past 3 months in 2019, up from 40,000 who reported using in 2012. Meanwhile, the number of seniors ending up in emergency departments with cannabis poisoning has also risen sharply since legalization, new research shows. It's led some experts to call for more education and better guidance around safe cannabis consumption for older adults. Dr. Nathan Stahl, a geriatrician at Mount Sinai Hospital in Toronto, recalls a patient in his 80s who came to the ER. This older adult was presenting in the way that individuals would present with very serious illness, decreased level of consciousness, hallucinating, high blood pressure and heart rate, nausea and vomiting, Stahl said. The usual litany of tests didn't reveal an obvious cause for why the man was so unwell, Stahl said. Then, a toxicology screen came back positive showing the man had cannabis in his system. I think when people think about cannabis poisoning or taking too much cannabis, they think about someone who's coming in giddy, euphoric, maybe asking to eat. I don't think many people think of this as someone who's, quite ill. The culprit? An edible cannabis product belonging to a family member that the patient had unknowingly consumed, thinking it was a snack. Stahl remembers the family member turning beet red with embarrassment upon learning what had happened. Because it's so socially acceptable now, edible cannabis products aren't necessarily always treated as a potentially dangerous substance if someone who's not intending to take it can get into it. Stahl is the author of a study published last month in the peer-reviewed medical journal JAMA Internal Medicine, looking into cannabis poisoning in seniors. It found that the number of people 65 and older visiting Ontario emergency departments with cannabis poisoning tripled between 2015 and 2022. The report broke that data down into 3 periods: pre-legalization, legalization permitting the sale of dried cannabis flowers only, and legalization opening the market to edible cannabis. It found that the rate of ER visits for cannabis poisoning among seniors saw a spike following the first phase of legalization. Once edibles were legalized, the rate rose yet again, and the study did not differentiate between which poisonings were intentional, such as self-medication, and which were unintentional, such as accidental ingestion. The study's findings come after other research has similarly shown an increase in the number of children hospitalized for accidental cannabis poisonings after legalization. A 2022 study published in the New England Journal of Medicine found that 3 provinces, Alberta, BC, and Ontario, saw twice the increase in pediatric hospitalizations after edibles were legalized compared to Quebec, which did not permit edible sales at the time of the study. Like Stahl, Clark points to the higher potency of today's cannabis as a factor in increased risk of poisoning for seniors. The joints that people might have been smoking in the 60s and 70s are very different than the cannabis that people have access to now. When it comes to edibles, Clark says many of the products Canadians turn to contain much more than 2.5 milligrams of the psychoactive compound THC, which he considers a standard dose. Another factor is the nature of edibles themselves, as their effects take longer to kick in compared to smoking a joint. With edible cannabis, the onset of the high, the peak, is actually about 3 hours, Stahl said. If those using cannabis don't feel anything immediately, they're liable to do something called dose stacking, where they take additional doses before peak effect is kicked in. Then there are the age-related factors at play. Declines in metabolism of cannabis and changes in the fat composition of older adult bodies means that cannabis sticks around longer, Stahl said. Older adults are more likely to take other prescription medications, some of which may be psychoactive, and there are higher rates of cognitive impairment. Edible cannabis should be kept in locked locations in homes, and any cannabis product should be clearly labeled and marked, Stahl said. Stahl and Clark also called for senior-specific dosing guidance. Stahl said many people don't often think of older adults like McBride talking openly about using drugs, which he believes hinders the ability of healthcare practitioners to engage in conversations with seniors about using cannabis. And I'm going to put a bit of a sidebar in here, again, because David Brown, in fact, covered off some of this in a story on Stratcon a couple of episodes ago, where some of this information talking about this is a little misleading, because in many cases, those who are dealing with the higher doses of cannabis are getting them from the illegal market or from the illicit market, not from the legal world where your maximum THC per edible is 10 milligrams per package. So nobody is getting too high on those ones unless they're stacking up package after package, and they probably wouldn't do that because the cost of that is exorbitant. So be aware. If you are heading down the edibles path, and you have not gone down that path before, follow the advice. Go low, go slow. My best advice? First of all, get your edibles from the legal market, where you know that the dosages are going to be maintained. Start with a low dosage. And the first time you try them on an occasion, just take one. Yes, I know. After an hour or two, you're going to say, well, I don't feel anything. I'm going to take another. Don't. That's where people run into problems. Because with the endocannabinoid system, what can happen, because it is a different THC, it becomes 11-hydroxy-THC instead of delta-9-THC, which is what we smoke. It's about 5 or 6 times more powerful, and it's way more unpredictable. And it's that unpredictability that creates most of the problems we're seeing in the cannabis world. So follow the advice. Give the advice to all your friends and neighbors. Anybody you know who's heading down that edible cannabis path, make sure you go low and slow. Just take a single dosage, and if that doesn't work for you that night, try a different dosage the next night. That's the advice from the Cannabis Podcast. And for this story, we're actually going to the bccraftfarmerscoop.com, to their websites, and the federal health minister is listening to BC craft cannabis farmers. The British Columbia Craft Farmers Co-op today praised the Federal Minister of Health for agreeing with the proposal from BC craft cannabis farmers to lift unfair production and processing limits on craft farmers, microprocessors, and nurseries. In a list of regulatory improvements unveiled this week, the Health Minister is proposing to increase the amount of cannabis that can be cultivated and or processed by craft farmers and microprocessors by a factor of 4. The BCCFC has been calling for this change since it was established in 2020. We're very thankful to Minister Holland for finally listening to Canada's top cannabis experts, BC Craft Farmers, said BCCFC President Tara Kirkpatrick. In addition to improving the bottom line of struggling small cannabis businesses, increases to the unreasonably low production limits on micro-license holders mean consumers will have more legal access to the products they're seeking. Fresh, locally grown cannabis from farmers passionate about the plant. More than any other province, BC will benefit from these cannabis policy improvements, said BCCFC Vice President Richard Willems. With BC's global reputation for producing the best cannabis in the world, a 4-fold capacity increase means the world's best craft cannabis farmers, small-scale processors, and nurseries will have a better chance of surviving their transition to legalization and meeting consumer demands. In addition to thanking Health Minister Mark Holland, BCCFC recognized the leadership of BC Member of Parliament Patrick Wheeler, West Vancouver Sunshine Coast Sea to Sky, for his advocacy and vision. In April, Patrick attended the BCCF's 2024 Craft Cannabis Summit in Prince George, and he promised to take the voice of BC's craft cannabis sector back to Parliament Hill. BCCFC President also thanked BC MPs Alistair McGregor, Cowichan Malahat Langford, and John Aldag for Cloverdale Langley City for their ongoing interest and recognition of BC craft cannabis' full potential over the years. Kirkpatrick said the increased federal capacity limits make it easier to define BC craft cannabis products for consumers, tourists, and international markets seeking premium BC brands. The provincial government has been seeking ideas on how to best define what size a cannabis farm and or a processor should be to be considered authentic BC craft cannabis. And that story from bccraftfarmerscoop.com, and we already heard about some of those changes in the proposal. Hey, things are changing in the cannabis world. It's actually happening.
Exploring the world of Canadian cannabis culture, one toke at a time. This is the Cannabis Podcast.
All right, I may have jumped the gun a little bit last week when I said that you were able to now grow your 4 plants in Manitoba. Here's a story from Stratcan.com written by David Brown that indicates that may not be the case just yet. Although Manitoba recently passed legislation to allow people to grow cannabis at home, they could be waiting several months before the law actually comes into force. A source with the Manitoba government tells Strachan that the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Manitoba are currently formulating legislation with the LGCA that will allow people in the province to grow up to 4 cannabis plants at home, and expects that this will be in place within the next 6 months. The bill was passed on June 3rd, but the specific details of the law are still unknown. Bill 34, the Liquor, Gaming and Cannabis Control Amendment Act, which repealed Manitoba's ban on growing up to 4 cannabis plants at home, passed on June 3rd, but the specific details of the new law are still unknown. A media representative with the Manitoba government tells Strachan via email that no information on the new law is currently available due to a media blackout related to a current bylaw election, but says the bill itself has not yet received royal assent. Government documents online, however, do show it received royal assent on June 4th. This does not mean the law is in effect, though. Jesse Lavoie, who spearheaded a lawsuit targeting Manitoba's homegrown ban, but says he would be disappointed by a long delay in implementing the law. We appreciate the progressive update to our archaic homegrown prohibition, Lavoie tells Strachan. Implanting this policy immediately will allow Manitobans to take advantage of the summer and grow as nature intended in the sunshine. Any delay just means our status as second-class citizens compared to the rest of Canada persists. Lavoie's organization Toba Grown has now suspended their lawsuit following the government's move to repeal the homegrown ban, but he says they can still move forward with the lawsuit if the law takes too long to implement. So we jumped the gun a little bit. They're still not quite ready to grow their 4 plants in Manitoba, but hopefully someday soon. And we haven't heard too many of these stories. This is a story from Strachan.com on Health Canada's recall for cannabis products containing undeclared intoxicating cannabinoid. An Alberta-based cannabis company has recalled several cannabis oils and soft gels due to the presumed presence of hexohydrocannabinol, or HHC, considered by Health Canada to be an intoxicating cannabinoid. HHC is a semi-synthetic CBD often synthesized from CBD. The recall involves 6 lots of products from cannabis producer iNaturally Organic Incorporated's Emprise CBN plus CBD 50 mg soft gels, New Leaf Naturals 1800 mg full spectrum hemp multi-cannabinoid oil soft gels, and New Leaf Naturals 1800 mg full spectrum hemp multi-cannabinoid oil cannabis extracts. The New Leaf Naturals oil contains Delta-9, CBC, CBD, CBG, and CBN, each at 3 mg per soft gel. The New Leaf Naturals soft gel contains CBC, CBD, CBG, and CBN, each at 15 mg per ml. The recalled products were sold in Ontario, British Columbia, Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and the Yukon, and through medical cannabis platforms Herbal Dispatch, Open Fields Winnipeg, and Metasibus. Health Canada says the recall is due to the identified hazard of the presumed presence of hexohydrocannabinol, which consumers may not be aware of. To date, iNaturally Organic Incorporated says it has received 2 adverse reaction reports about these products. Health Canada has received 3 adverse reaction reports and 1 complaint related to these products. Health Canada says consumers should immediately stop using the product, either returning the product to where it was purchased or disposing of it. Mukdeep Mangat, VP of Operations at Emprise, tells Strachan that they have independent lab tests showing no presence of HHC and were surprised by Health Canada's findings. Analytical testing laboratories working with iNaturally Organic did not detect HHC in any of the products prior to batch release. iNaturally Organic received 2 adverse event reports about all 3 products combined. Health Canada received 3 adverse event reports and 1 complaint. The adverse event reports and complaint total 6 reports after sale of well over 10,000 units total of the 3 products, or less than 1 in 1,000 units. iNaturally Organic prioritizes the health of its customers and is investigating Health Canada's assertion of presumed presence of HHC, despite no evidence of HHC in the products from analytical testing laboratories working with iNaturally Organic. So there's an interesting twist at Health Canada identifying a component that the companies aren't even sure is in the product. This is certainly an interesting industry. Well, as always, thank you so much for being here. I truly appreciate the fact that you come by and hang around at the Cannabis Podcast. I had one quote that was put out under the reviews, and it really probably is the one that makes me feel the best. And that's I just feel like I'm sitting around with an old friend. And that's the feel that I really hope you get, that it's just you and I sitting around chatting about cannabis. So thanks for being here. Truly appreciate that. How about we end with some humor to put a smile on your face before we finish up the day? And so why don't cannabis plants ever play hide and seek? Well, because they're always getting too high. What did the cannabis plant say to the potato? You're a real couch potato. What's a stoner's favorite kind of movie? A historical drama. Why did the stoner cross the road? So who else would follow a chicken? Caveman discovers weed. Caveman discovers fire. Stone Age begins. And that's the chuckle we shall end on. If you ever have a comment on anything you hear in the Cannabis Podcast, please send a note. to info@cannabispodcast.com. I love hearing from you. Also, if you have any suggestions for future topics for the show, also love to hear those. Thanks so much for being here. That is episode 160 of the Cannabis Podcast.
From the cannabis-infused studio, high above the Okanagan Valley, this was the Cannabis Podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's show. To check out more great cannabis podcasts, go to podconnects.com. Here's a preview of one of our other shows.
Hey there, my name is Leah Babrudi, and I'm the founder and host of Canachicks Podcast, where I discuss cannabis, psychedelics, and other natural medicines. I not only interview people who use them as treatment for different conditions, but also the entrepreneurs who share their knowledge on how they built their businesses. If this sounds interesting to you, give my show a listen. I'm sure you'll learn something that'll surprise you.